Hey everyone. Today I'm going to review the Rise of the Online Writing Instruction course, reflecting on the material conditions of college composition teaching by Griffin and Minter. This text goes in a lot of different places quickly, so try not to feel overwhelmed or stressed when you see these sort of quick jettison moves towards different concerns. I think what they're trying to do is touch on a variety of material changes that are happening in online writing instruction and with digital writing more generally. So the first thing that they talk about are material conditions, and they note Yancey describes in 2004 digital literacy as textual literacies, and that's combining print, spoken, visual, and digital processes. And they're sort of noting that since 2004, they're writing in 2013, things have changed a lot. There's a lot more online tools available. And I really like what they say about social media, just noting that it's sort of moving from, one activity, reading, versus one activity, writing, to something that's more collaborative, to something in which you are reading and writing sort of at once. And they sort of give a lot of attention to social media's role in that, which I obviously like given my interest as a digital literacies guy. They talk about new materiality. They say that nearly all engagements with text online hold out the possibility for interaction and a fluid passage between reading and writing, so that our literacies blur a boundary that had once seemed clearly marked, making the roles we inhabit, reader and writer, a single role defined not by activity, but by textual connection and interaction with others. So here I can see how sort of new materiality lends itself to opportunities for collaboration. And going on this, she calls it they call it softened boundaries. This idea that these new spaces allow individuals to be both reader and writer, both reviewer and writer. Right? You get to occupy these different roles often at once and collaboratively. They note that Yancey sort of describes the changes as moving towards oral, print, and screen, and that these are not the only changes anymore. They explain that different types of screens have different type of functions, including touch screens. And one of the things that I like to think about that they did not bring up is this idea of Apple versus Android, right? What does an Android tablet give you that an Apple tablet doesn't, and vice versa? Even emojis are different, right? And certain emojis translate differently when they're sent depending on what devices you're using. They really emphasize tablets, and they say that tablets, they note the study where a quarter of college students already have tablets just 2 years after the iPad comes out, and that we need to redesign our classes for touchscreens. They don't really tell us how to do this, but again, their emphasis is just sort of touching on these different issues, these different types of new materials that students are writing with. I really took issue with this part because they say that that's a tool that's better for consuming than composing, and I think that's just wrong. I have students that use tablets, and I always think, man, you're able to take notes so much better than everyone else because they can draw on Microsoft Word along with typing. I've seen students use tablets in really cool ways for actually composing, so that's my take on that. She covers some different tools you can use. If you want to pause here, and try these different things out, feel free. All of these sort of allow you to gather, share, and comment on resources as you're working within them. They note that there are too many apps out there, right? There's so many different types of applications, and it's okay to give free rein to those applications, but we need to be mindful of the fact that different students have different bandwidth. And in 2013, she anticipates that cell phone providers are going to start, or rather wireless networks will start charging for data usage. And while this hasn't quite happened, the Net Neutrality Act of this year does suggest that they're on the right track with that. This is something they touch on really, really quickly and do not confront other than really it's just this one sentence. And here they're just saying that on top of these issues, you have coding literacy, right? And my question, as you can see over here to the right, is how might we teach code without knowing how to code ourselves? Do we need to know how to code in order to teach sort of how to be critically and rhetorically aware of coding? Another thing that they touch on is multimodal composition. We believe in it, and yet they have studies that suggest that students flock more towards textual-based assignments when they are given opportunities to pick. And sort of, as you can see, my question here at the bottom is, wow, like how do we address this issue if multimodal composing is something we want to do, but students don't want to do it so much, even when it's in online courses? What does that say about multimodality? How can we teach multimodality in these spaces? Okay, so now we get into these different types of issues with schools and learners and missions. So the first issue is schools. Different schools have different types of missions. That makes it very difficult for us to have sort of a larger framework to all build from, because composition courses are in so many different types of schools, and those different schools have different sort of outcomes and goals, both as a school in general, but also in the writing course. It's very difficult to sort of all get on the same page. Another issue is that there are different types of learners, and that these different types of learners, right, that is those that maybe wouldn't fit in what we might call the quote-unquote norm student body, are especially flocking to online writing instruction. So the same issues that you have with ELL, with students with disabilities, right, with low-income students, these students are gravitating to these spaces more than any other student population, and going online does not fix those issues and does not necessarily alleviate them, despite what the 90s might have suggested about online sort of fixing so many different identity markers and learning types. So benefits and challenges, she notes that the big benefit is that at-risk students benefit from this space because they can take classes that they normally wouldn't be able to for a variety of reasons. But that's the only benefit she names. After that, it's a whole lot of challenges, right? There's irregular access to reliable computer tech and internet connection, right? They may have it at certain hours, but not at others. So, that means you couldn't require all students to meet at a certain time, potentially. There's also, these students may have limited knowledge and experience working with this technology, right? And then the last thing is that attention to different types of access affecting different literacies. So while the first two are sort of issues with how the population, our target population, would engage with these spaces, the third problem is that we don't know how different types of access affect different types of literacies. So she notes the lowering socioeconomic communities in a recent Pew Research report, notes that they're using cell phones primarily to write, and we have not done studies that show how that would change how you're developing your literacy practices. So then they focus on low-income students and ELL students, saying that without additional support, online learning can undercut progression for these students rather than help them. They cite Anna Harrington, who notes that ELL students are going to have more trouble than others in text-rich environments, and are also likely to self-mute due to self-consciousness regarding their written English skills, right? So ELL students may be able to blend in better in class in speaking, but when all contribution is made through writing, right, how does that make them feel insecure or create a boundary for them to participate? Who else is suffering online? So this is a part that kind of irked me because they use this study, but they don't tell us anything about the study. So if you're interested in what this study was, quantitative, qualitative, analysis theory, what it was, you'd have to go look into it. But essentially, it's males, younger students with lower levels of academic skill, and Black students all suffer when migrating online. And like I said before, this is especially troubling given that one of the touted benefits of OWI is increased access for those students who are underserved. And then the last thing that they note here is that of all of these students, it's English classes where this issue is the worst, where they see their skills diminishing moving online. So clearly, while some courses online may not affect how learners learn, writing online courses are especially susceptible to that. Oh, and then also there's the issue of disability. So they note that 30% of high school grads with disabilities enroll But a year after high school, only 10% of students with disabilities are enrolled in two-year colleges, and only 5% are enrolled in four-year colleges. So a year after high school graduation, only 5% of students with disabilities are enrolled in four-year colleges. So we have this opportunity to improve their access to college, but only if we make deliberate efforts to design courses that are fully accessible. She notes that they note that on disability, it is harder for instructors to identify and respond to the potential needs of students. I like this idea of a lack of visual cues, right? In the classroom, we see everyone and we can sort of intuit, who is struggling with what based off of cues from those students. But online, you don't get that. And so it's a lot more difficult to know what students you're working with and how. What we need is instructional development time and the support from institutions. This is a big thing that she comes back to. Almost after each of these issues, she emphasizes the need for institutional support in meeting these ends. And there's really interesting things she talks about is having more information about these students, sort of a turn to big data. If we know who we're working with, how could that help us? Another thing that she notes is that the help that we do get is primarily crash courses for learning management systems and not actual pedagogical development. So far, the three big areas to be concerned with are the conceptualization of the teacher's role and expertise, right? How should we exist online as teachers in these spaces, right? And how do we teach different groups online, given this new space? How do we get professional development? On here, she really just calls for needing more training from institutions. And then the last issue is workload. There's reasonable course caps and consideration of how technology can impact class time. And the final thing they note is that those who are already exploited, like graduate assistants, are going to be even more exploited in online courses. Another issue is literacy load. So they cite a study where the same courses being moved online had much more literacy, much more reading tasks, and that was unrealistic and especially was hurtful to certain demographics, like we mentioned earlier, ELL students specifically. Nearing the end, she talks about big data. The good thing about big data is it allows us to sort of mine a wealth of information where we previously could not. The bad thing about big data is that there are issues of students' right to their own access, right? How much profiling is too much profiling, and how can profiling be too limiting in terms of painting the issues that students and teachers both have. Then she notes, like, how do we tell teachers? What do we tell them? Do we suggest things? And my question on that is, who is we? I'm assuming that's like some sort of administrative role. And then they point to the familiar issue that we talk about with big data these days, which is sort of how is it being assessed, right? How is it being approached? Who is using it and how? And given that it sort of promises to give us so much knowledge and information, how can individual teachers sort of fight against this idea when a big data sort of starts to claim that we are not doing a good job or need to improve in this area when we already sort of know how to teach the course regardless of what the big data might say about us. So she closes out by saying we need to do more than pay attention, right? And that reaches back to Cynthia Self saying in the late 90s we need to pay attention to how literacies and technology affect literacy and equality. Now we need to do more than pay attention. We need to sort of demand certain things. One is that we retain our roles in all aspects of literacy learning, including course planning, design, tool selection, assessment at the student course and program level. The second thing is that teachers need professional development opportunities that integrate instruction on how to use these tools, right, which is something that a lot of places do provide, with sound instruction and writing pedagogy focused on new literacies. Equally important, instructors must have time and support to develop and share these pedagogical practices that are not the same as face-to-face practices, that instead embrace affordances of emerging tech. And finally, institutions claiming commitment to expanding access should be measured by the extent to which they observe reasonable class size limits and provide teachers with the kinds of support and compensated responsibilities outlined above. Only through that are we good to go when it comes to OWI?